Ladies and gentlemen, how often do we find ourselves asking, is God trying to tell me something sometimes? Life throws these moments at us, a strange coincidence, an encounter with a stranger, a recurring dream, or even a series of challenges that feel almost too specific to be random. But how do we know when we're truly being guided by something greater? How can we even begin to make sense of that feeling? When we talk about vulnerability, especially in the context of listening for something greater than ourselves, we're talking about peeling back the layers we often build around our hearts. These layers, the shields we put up, are things we build over time to protect ourselves from disappointment, from hurt, from the feeling of not measuring up. They're there to keep us safe. But in that effort to stay protected, we also risk shutting ourselves off from things that could genuinely guide us, inspire us, or help us grow. Listening in this sense isn't just about hearing sounds or words, it's about tuning in to the spaces between those sounds, paying attention to subtle cues and energies that don't always make noise. Vulnerability and listening go hand in hand here because they both ask us to be willing to feel, to let our guard down, and to be truly present with ourselves in ways that we may find uncomfortable. Listening deeply means that we're not only giving someone else or something else the space to communicate with us, but we're giving our own inner voice that same respect and attention. In our everyday lives, so much of what we hear is filtered through our mental to-do lists, our distractions, our schedules, and our preoccupations with how we want to present ourselves to the world. We're in a constant loop of projecting and absorbing, checking off boxes, nodding along, and performing. Vulnerable listening breaks that loop. It asks us to be quiet, not just externally, but internally too. To stop planning what we're going to say next, to stop trying to force our own agenda onto what we're hearing, and instead to approach it with curiosity, openness, and trust. This type of listening isn't about control or being right, it's about allowing ourselves to be moved. And there's a beauty in the humility of this vulnerability. When we're open and receptive, we're willing to be shown something we might not have otherwise seen. We make room for the possibility that we don't know it all. Maybe it's letting go of that internal dialogue that says, I have to figure it all out myself, or I have to have all the answers. Vulnerability gives us permission to lean into uncertainty without feeling like we're failing or falling behind. It allows us to admit that maybe, just maybe, we need guidance from a source beyond ourselves. Another part of vulnerable listening is trusting the process, even if we don't fully understand it. When we're in a vulnerable state, we're actually more in touch with our intuition, our instincts, and our inner sense of truth. We're not trying to mold what we hear into a version that aligns perfectly with our expectations or desires. We're just present to receive whatever it is as it is. And that might mean hearing something that doesn't fit neatly into our lives or our plans. But vulnerability means having the courage to sit with that discomfort, to lean into it without needing immediate answers or solutions. Listening vulnerably also means noticing when we're trying to rationalize or intellectualize the message we're receiving. How often do we explain things away? When we notice a sign or a feeling, it's easy to brush it off as a coincidence or a figment of our imagination. Vulnerable listening means honoring these subtle messages, no matter how small, and allowing ourselves to feel deeply without judging ourselves for being silly or too sensitive. It means that we recognize that there are moments, sounds, symbols, and silences that speak to us in ways our minds may not always understand, but our hearts do. So vulnerable listening at its core isn't about simply paying attention, it's about being present with ourselves and the world around us in a way that doesn't seek control, doesn't demand logic, and doesn't need validation. It's trusting that our sensitivity and openness to what we're feeling and experiencing might be exactly what allows us to connect with something bigger than ourselves. Courage to acknowledge signs is something we often overlook, but it's an incredibly powerful and deeply challenging part of any journey of faith, self-discovery, or growth. It takes true bravery to acknowledge that something outside of our logical, carefully constructed plans might be calling us to attention. Because when we notice these signs, these little nudges, whispers, or even loud and startling revelations, they rarely fit neatly into our agenda. They disrupt us. They don't come when we're fully prepared with all our goals met and our paths clear. They come in the middle of our lives, often when we're at our busiest, our most vulnerable, or our most resistant to change. To have courage here is to first admit that something we might not understand fully is trying to reach us. It's admitting that we don't have all the answers, that maybe there's something greater in the universe with a perspective beyond our own. This is uncomfortable for a lot of us. We want to believe that we're in control, that everything we do is leading us exactly where we want to go. But sometimes these signs or messages call us to make a change, to pause, or even to completely redirect our lives in ways that feel risky and uncertain. The courage to acknowledge a sign, then, isn't just about saying, "I see it." It's about facing the possibility that what we're seeing requires us to change. And change in itself requires courage. To acknowledge a sign or message often means confronting parts of ourselves we may have ignored or buried. For instance, if we get a message about forgiveness, maybe a nudge that it's time to let go of a grudge we've held for years, acting on it can feel almost impossible. We've carried that grudge as part of our identity. Releasing it might feel as if we're letting go of a piece of ourselves. And yet acknowledging that sign means opening ourselves to vulnerability and trust, saying, "I am willing to consider that there's a different way, a path that I didn't plan or expect." Then there's the courage to not only recognize the sign, but to stand by it, even if others around us can't see or understand it. This is one of the hardest parts. Our inner signs or messages are deeply personal, often invisible to everyone else, and they can leave us feeling alone or isolated. Imagine feeling called to pursue a career or life path that seems irrational or risky to those around you. Acknowledging that sign, owning it, and daring to pursue it means that you might have to let go of the need for validation from those closest to you. It means having the courage to trust that your path is yours and only you are responsible for walking it. Acknowledging a sign also demands that we face our fears of failure. When we receive a message or feel called to do something, it's natural to wonder, what if I'm wrong? There's an incredible weight to this, as acting on a sign that feels genuine to us but leads to uncertainty or hardship can feel like a personal failing. Yet courage here is about accepting that failure too. Might be part of the journey. It's understanding that even if things don't work out exactly as we hope, acknowledging and acting on these signs might still lead us to valuable lessons, growth, or even redirection to something better than we imagined. Another element of courage is letting go of the need for immediate clarity. Acknowledging signs doesn't always come with a roadmap or a clear set of instructions. Often it's more like following a trail of breadcrumbs, one clue or hint at a time. We might not know exactly where it's leading, and that can be frustrating or even frightening. Having courage here means moving forward without full understanding, trusting that one step will lead to the next, and that clarity will come in its own time. This kind of faith requires that we release our attachment to the outcome and be willing to let the process unfold naturally, even if it's far slower than we'd like. And perhaps the most daunting aspect of acknowledging signs is recognizing that they might ask us to step into our purpose, our potential, or our power in ways that we've been avoiding. It's one thing to see a sign calling us to live a bigger life, but it's another to accept that we have the capacity to live up to that calling. Acknowledging a sign means looking at ourselves honestly, recognizing our potential, and in some cases, confronting the ways we've held ourselves back. This is no easy task. It requires us to challenge our old stories, the narratives we've created about who we are and what we're capable of. Having courage here means allowing ourselves to envision a bigger, braver version of ourselves and being willing to take the steps, no matter how uncertain, to grow into it. Embracing imperfection in the journey is an essential but challenging part of truly living and growing. When we set out on any path, whether it's personal growth, a career ambition, a relationship, or a spiritual quest, there's often an unspoken expectation that things will unfold smoothly, perhaps even perfectly. We envision a clear, linear path without setbacks, where progress is visible and every step takes us closer to an ideal outcome. But in reality, the journey is rarely, if ever, that simple. Life has a way of disrupting our plans, throwing in detours, unexpected obstacles, and moments of doubt that make us question if we're even moving in the right direction. Embracing imperfection in this journey means accepting that life's challenges, the moments that don't go according to plan, are not just inevitable, they are essential. They're not failures or signs that we're doing something wrong. They are part of the process, shaping us in ways that straight lines and easy paths never could. Our imperfections are mistakes. Our stumbles, our detours are often the very things that lead us to growth, insight, and resilience. But it's not easy to see it that way, especially in a culture that values success, achievement, and a constant upward trajectory. We're conditioned to think that any deviation from perfection is a weakness or a setback, something to be corrected rather than embraced. But when we embrace imperfection, we're giving ourselves permission to be human. We're allowing ourselves the grace to try, to fail, and to try again without the burden of needing everything to be flawless. This mindset shift allows us to see the beauty in our own messiness, to recognize that there is something profoundly powerful in being able to get back up after we fall. We often hold ourselves to impossibly high standards, thinking that if we don't perform perfectly or achieve exactly what we set out to, then we've somehow failed. But true growth comes when we can look at our imperfections, the places where we don't have it all together, where we've made mistakes, where we don't know what we're doing, and accept them as integral to our journey. Embracing imperfection also means letting go of the fear of judgment. Many of us are so concerned with how others perceive us that we hold ourselves back, constantly editing, polishing, and perfecting, afraid to reveal anything less than an idealized version of ourselves. This fear can keep us from even starting the journey as we wait for a time when we feel ready or good enough to begin. But the truth is, we're never going to feel fully ready or fully capable. Growth doesn't come from waiting until we're perfect. It comes from showing up as we are with all our flaws and daring to take the next step despite them. When we embrace imperfection, we also free ourselves from the need for constant validation. Rather than striving to meet an external standard of success, we begin to define success in terms that are meaningful to us. This shift is liberating because it allows us to focus on our own progress, our own unique journey, instead of comparing ourselves to others. We begin to see that our imperfections, our unique quirks, and our own personal struggles are what make our journey authentic. They're the things that set us apart, the elements that give depth and character to our story. And then there's the unexpected wisdom that comes from the imperfect moments. Those moments when we miss the mark, make a mistake, or fall short of our expectations often teach us more than any moment of success ever could. In our failures and missteps, we find lessons about resilience, about humility, about empathy, not just for ourselves, but for others who are also struggling and growing. Embracing imperfection means recognizing that these so-called mistakes are not detours, they're opportunities. They push us to reflect, to adapt, and to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Another layer of embracing imperfection is accepting the idea that progress is not always linear. Sometimes we'll take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Some days we'll feel like we're exactly where we're supposed to be, and other days we'll feel lost and uncertain. This ebb and flow is a natural part of growth, and it doesn't mean we're failing, it means we're evolving. When we can accept the non-linear nature of progress, we allow ourselves to be more patient and compassionate with ourselves. We realize that we're not in a race, that there's no rush to reach a certain destination by a certain time. We give ourselves the space to breathe, to pause, and to appreciate the small moments of growth, even if they don't look perfect on the surface. Embracing imperfection also allows us to connect more authentically with others. When we can be open about our own struggles and challenges, we invite others to do the same. We create space for vulnerability and honesty, for real human connection that isn't based on presenting a polished, idealized version of ourselves. Instead of trying to impress others or prove our worth, we can simply be ourselves, flaws and all. This kind of openness fosters deeper relationships because it's grounded in truth, in the shared understanding that none of us has it all figured out, and that's okay. And ultimately, embracing imperfection gives us permission to find joy in the journey itself, rather than obsessing over the end goal. When we let go of the need for perfection, we open ourselves to the richness of the experience, the laughter, the learning, the connection, the growth that happens along the way. We begin to see that our worth isn't tied to how well we perform or how flawlessly we navigate our path. Instead, our worth is inherent in the courage it takes to keep going, to keep showing up, to keep showing up, to keep trying, even when things don't go as planned. Trusting the bigger picture is an act of profound faith. It means believing that there's a purpose and a design in our lives, even when we can't see it clearly, even when we feel surrounded by confusion, setbacks, and heartache. It's about having confidence that our lives are part of something larger, something meaningful, something that's unfolding in a way that we may not fully understand yet. In a world that constantly pushes us to have a clear plan, define goals, and control over every step, trusting the bigger picture can feel counterintuitive. We're so used to equating progress with visible results that when life doesn't go according to our plans, we often see it as failure or as a sign that we're lost. But trusting the bigger picture is a reminder that what we see in the moment is only a fraction of the journey, only a piece of the puzzle. To truly trust the bigger picture, we have to let go of the idea that our value lies in achieving certain milestones by a specific time. We live in a culture that's fixated on timelines, where success is often measured by how fast we reach a goal or how soon we accomplish something significant. But life's purpose doesn't always fit into neat timelines. Sometimes the things that take the longest to come to fruition end up being the most transformative, the most rewarding. Trusting the bigger picture means allowing ourselves to let go of those societal pressures, to realize that our journey doesn't have to look like anyone else's. Each person's path is uniquely their own, filled with its own timing, its own challenges, its own rhythm. And trusting the bigger picture doesn't mean that everything will make sense immediately. It often requires us to sit with uncertainty, to embrace the not knowing. This is perhaps one of the hardest aspects of trust, to allow ourselves to stay open, even when we don't have all the answers, and to find peace in that openness. We're conditioned to think that clarity and certainty are necessary to move forward, that we must know exactly where we're headed to take the next step. But sometimes life asks us to step out in faith, even if the next chapter hasn't been revealed. Trusting the bigger picture means finding courage in ambiguity, believing that even if we can't see the full map, each step forward will guide us closer to the destination meant for us. When we trust in a larger design, we also start to see that setbacks and detours are not always obstacles, but are often part of our growth. Maybe we're led down a path that challenges us or pushes us to the edge of our comfort zone. Maybe we encounter people, experiences, or struggles that we didn't anticipate. In the moment, these challenges can feel like distractions, as if they're pulling us away from where we think we need to be. But when we zoom out, when we view these experiences as part of the bigger picture, we can start to understand their role in shaping us, strengthening us, and guiding us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves and our purpose. What feels like a delay or even a misstep often contains hidden lessons, insights, and opportunities that we might never have sought out on our own, but that end up being essential to who we become. Trusting the bigger picture also means recognizing that we are interconnected, that our journey is not isolated but woven into a larger tapestry of lives, events, and stories. Sometimes the impact of our actions or choices doesn't become clear until much later, or it may ripple out to affect people we've never even met. This perspective can help us see that even small actions or moments that seem insignificant to us may play a meaningful role in someone else's life or in the unfolding of events around us. By trusting in a broader design, we begin to see that our lives are connected in ways we might not fully understand, but that contribute to something greater than ourselves. Another element of trusting the bigger picture is patience. When we're so focused on the next achievement or the next destination, we often overlook the richness of the present moment. But trusting in a larger design teaches us to slow down, to recognize that life's purpose often reveals itself gradually. We may not get all the answers right away, and that's okay. Trusting the bigger picture allows us to lean into this process without feeling rushed or pressured to solve every mystery immediately. It's about allowing life to unfold at its own pace, embracing each chapter as it comes, and finding peace in the pauses. This trust also invites us to redefine what success and failure mean in our lives. So often we see failure as something negative, as a sign that we've missed the mark or fallen short of our potential. But when we look at failure through the lens of a bigger picture, we see it differently. We recognize that failure can be a teacher, a guide that steers us back to our path or even redirects us to a new one we hadn't considered. Trusting the bigger picture means embracing these so-called failures as part of the journey, understanding that they're not dead ends, but rather valuable lessons that ultimately contribute to our growth and wisdom. It's about seeing that our worth isn't tied to a flawless journey, but to our willingness to keep moving forward, even when things don't go as planned. And as we practice trusting in the bigger picture, we may also find that it allows us to hold space for hope, even in our darkest moments. Life is filled with seasons of joy, seasons of hardship, seasons of loss, and seasons of renewal. There are times when it feels as if everything is falling apart, as if we're stuck in a period of pain or uncertainty that we can't see our way out of. In these times, trusting in a larger design reminds us that this season too has its place. Just as winter gives way to spring, our own times of struggle or sorrow can eventually lead to growth, renewal, and even unexpected beauty. Trusting the bigger picture is an act of resilience, a way of holding on to the belief that even in our hardest moments, we are being prepared, shaped, and guided for what's to come. Finally, trusting the bigger picture is about surrender. It's about releasing the illusion of total control, recognizing that while we can make choices and take steps, we're not responsible for orchestrating every detail of our lives. This surrender doesn't mean giving up, it means letting go of the constant need to predict, plan, and perfect every outcome. It's an invitation to release the grip of anxiety, to stop wrestling with every what if, and to instead find comfort in the idea that there is a greater wisdom guiding us. This kind of trust requires humility and acknowledgement that we don't have all the answers, and that sometimes the best thing we can do is let go and allow life to flow in its own way. In the end, learning to listen, to embrace vulnerability, to courageously acknowledge the signs, to trust in a bigger picture, and to embrace imperfection, these are all parts of a deeper journey toward purpose, resilience, and growth. This journey isn't about getting it all right, being certain, or achieving an ideal. It's about leaning into the unknown, trusting that even the messy, difficult moments are part of our path, and understanding that each step, each lesson, and each setback holds value. When we open ourselves to this kind of faith and honesty, we allow life to guide us in ways we might never have envisioned, but that ultimately lead us to become our truest selves. And in that openness, in that trust, we find not only the courage to walk forward, but also the grace to understand that we are exactly where we need to be.